Thank you, Coach, for having me here. I appreciate the Richmond strength staff to make sure that I was able to come back and share some things. I'll have two talks during the course of the weekend. This one will be basically a transfer of the performance that you build in the weight room and progressing a lot of exercises that I feel are very important. I want to thank my one assistant for putting this together for me. But today's topics we'll cover, and that assistant's Kevin Kokas, but today's topics that we'll cover, I'll get right into it. We're going to quickly define agility, acceleration, just give you an understanding of what it is, body position, rate of force development, deceleration, the eccentric and isometric aspects of it, and technique considerations for them. Now, if you were here last year and was able to hear my triphasic talk, which would basically preface and go along with this, it's a way to progress a ton of exercises in your programming throughout the progression plan, whatever it is, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 weeks. And what we'll do is I'll give you plenty of examples and show you how to progress them. If we can go on to the next slide. Okay, really quick, the body's ability to change direction, its path of motion through a triphasic action. You have to keep this in mind. Consisting of deceleration, which is the eccentric phase. In all human movements, there's an eccentric phase if it's dynamic. So a squat down and a squat up, it's dynamic. A momentary pause. Even if the human body's not stopped, the muscle action, if the joint changes directions, the muscle has to stop at one given time. Keep that in mind, okay? At its highest level, it has to stop if it's a reversible dynamic action, okay? A momentary pause, which is the explosive isometric phase. It's brief, but it's explosive, and it's short. And an acceleration in a different direction, which is obviously the concentric. So if you've heard my triphasic talk, you can relate to that. But ultimately, with this concept here, you have to learn how to coach this up. Okay? If you can go to the next slide. Deceleration, dependent on eccentric and isometric strength. Is there one or the other? Folks, they're so intertwined when you really dig into them that it's really hard to see the difference. And I think they relate to each other in many ways. First of all, talking to Doc over the years, a lot of people, when they do plyometrics, they say, okay, you need to absorb the force, which can mean when you go to land from doing a jump, you land softly. Folks, that is completely incorrect. Understand, you need to withstand these forces, not absorb them, okay? So when you touch the ground and you're landing in the right position to jump again, you don't land soft. Folks, you land hard and explode and come out of the movement, okay? Nothing in sports, you absorb them. Now, the term absorb, okay, so when you go to change directions, you want to instantly stop. You don't want to absorb these forces and change. That's a bad athlete right there. The one athlete that stops and progresses slowly out of the corner, okay? So keep that in mind. That's how you want to coach your sport-specific movements too, okay? Improvements in eccentric equal improvements in concentric, not vice versa, okay? So you have to become and be able to handle the stopping force before you can apply it. If you can't handle the stopping force, you're not improving the concentric movement, okay? You have to be able to, and this is why I spend many times throughout the year, 2 to 3, making sure my athletes do not lack eccentric strength so they can become concentric, I say performance-based concentric, obviously improving their skills. Explosive isometric phase, crucial for effective transition in the opposite direction. So that isometric strength can even help stop, all right? If you can bring it to, especially in joint-specific angles, and we'll show that later. The rate of force development, maximal rate, and the rise of muscular force in the beginning of a contraction depended on the nervous system capabilities, obviously the biomechanical actions of acceleration as I talk about it here. Quads act as a stabilizing force at the knee joint and they apply force. That's what they do, okay? They act as the stabilizing forces. So as you're going through there, your quad's extending your knee, okay? But the hamstrings direct the forces. You have to keep this in mind. That's how important they are. Can be lengthening and shortening. It's a unique muscle. It's lengthening and shortening at the same time, okay? Calves stabilize the ankle joint and direct the forces. Folks, one of the biggest things that I see, obviously with the calves, and this is just, let's say this is a good coaching point, I feel. If you read plenty of the biomechanics books and you have an understanding of the foot, what happens? As the foot strikes the ground, the toes, what do the small toes do? They reach for the ground. Then all the forces go where? Through the big toe. So why not, when you're jumping and when you're doing all your plyometric exercises, shouldn't you coach your athletes to push through their big toe? It'll make your big toe strong, create more forces that transfer through the ground, okay? And I'll give you an example where mistakes can be made, not mistakes where, you know, I've increased everything of an athlete and left that component out, and it actually gets worse. Okay, weak hips, we could talk all day about that, but weak hips, if you don't have strong hips, all this force can be applied, but it can cause displacement issues. So the hips can rotate various things. So you have to watch these things. You have to develop a biomechanical eye. And that's what Doc, I think, sometimes takes for granted when he speaks, because you look at some of his stuff, and it's very, very detailed to the highest level. And this is what you have to look at. You have to break these actions down. Next slide, please. Okay, so acceleration. Obviously, we're going to address body position, forward lean, in order to optimize thrust velocity. Is low in this thing during acceleration. It's lower than top end speed. You can cancel that. Okay, that's all right. Starting from zero velocity, explosive concentric. Okay, there's longer ground contact time, and when I say acceleration, we're talking steps 1 to 5. Okay, knee forward. You drive your knee forward. Okay, not up, as Doc said. Positive shin angles, and 3 to 6 strides is mainly acceleration. You can go to the next slide. So I'll give you an example of it. Take a look at these joint angles. This is acceleration, folks. This leg here is driving back. Again, this particular athlete would be driving through their toes. You have your knee joint here. Okay, shin angle's positive. That foot will strike the ground. Obviously, various things happen, including a large stretch reflex, what I'll get into the next slide. But first, I wanted to explain to you, I just added this to my talk when I was hearing Doc. Let's talk about, I showed you acceleration, which is the previous slide. This is top end speed. Now, when Doc's talking about doing the band work, here was one of the unique benefits that I believe I saw and we experience, is that when you're doing the band work, and a lot of people have a hard time saying, okay, when I saw Doc, he's doing those bands, and how much can that truly improve my athlete's performance? Folks, here's what we have to realize. When that leg swings forward, okay, there's a stretch reflex there. At this position, you have a stretch reflex running up through the shoulders, down through that hip, and then right here in the hip flexor. When this leg would fire forward, I don't have a picture of it. If it fires forward faster, what happens? You have a greater stretch reflex right here. You can see that I put those in pink, okay? There's a greater stretch reflex. So then what happens? If there's a greater, as the limb comes forward, what happens? It's cyclic. There's a greater force applied because you have a greater stretch reflex. So what happens then? The foot strikes the ground at a higher velocity. So by causing this mechanics in the backside to increase in the speed of the limb, as it swings through, it's greater force, and then it comes down with greater force. Got it? This is, again, it's 3 actions that take place at the top end speed. Just to understand the difference, I'm talking about acceleration today. This is top end speed, and even though Doc was talking about quickness, from the hip flexor and the backside mechanics, that it can take place even in the top end speed, okay? So we'll go to the next slide. Now, actually, can I go back real quick? With the biomechanics aspect, folks, this is what I believe the biomechanics should cycle through, or some of the research that we should direct, is we should take a look at our limb speeds at different phases. So if this phase is fast, and then the swing down phase is slower, and the strike phase is fast, but let's say this is the worst phase of the runner. Now this, actually, as the runners get better, each of these phases will obviously get faster. But if you find one of these 3 phases that are worse, then this is sports specificity on making that phase better so that the athlete can reach the highest level. Because you may work on these 2 phases and leave this one out, and they won't progress. Okay, so this is the detailed biomechanics that Doc's truly looking at. Next slide. I'm sorry. So then acceleration, the stretch reflex. Obviously, there's one in the hip flexor. When that leg slams forward, okay, there's one stretch reflex in the hip flexor on the foot that's on the ground, and the other one is actually in the glute and the hamstring. And then when that foot comes down and the foot strikes the ground, keep in mind there's a quad stretch reflex and then the calves. Now, if we would back up, let me show one more slide. When the foot strikes the ground, you know the function of the quad? It just keeps you from falling on the ground. That's all it does. Okay? That's all, I mean, really, that's all it does. So the hamstrings and glutes are pulling you forward. So whether you believe in the forward propulsion theory or the spring model theory, regardless, that this thing here, the quad, that's all it does at that phase. Okay? So we'll go back to the next one, forward. So then in the acceleration, obviously the quad has more importance. Okay? Now my daughter, she drew these, she wanted to redraw these for me. I'm not very good at the computer. She's 7. I did that with crayons. So she could do it a little better, but ultimately. So keep in mind this, so these are the qualities that we want to see and the things that we want to progress to. Next slide. Here's one of the biggest things that a number of years ago, it was 7 maybe even 7 years ago, with acceleration and transfer of your skill, and you have to learn coaching biomechanically this way. We actually sat down and watched a gold medal race with one of my track coaches, Phil Lundeen. They pointed out where one of the athletes that won the race had one of the worst start of his career. So you're talking some of the 10 fastest humans in the world was the last one out of the blocks. At that time, and many people, and this would have been 10, 12 years ago maybe even 15 now, many people picked their knees up when they ran, and the height of their foot was much greater. These are all trail. This is a simple analogy or analysis of the trail direction that the foot went. Okay, so everyone did this. This athlete was the last one out of the box. Low foot recovery, and on the third step, his foot hit prior to everybody else. So essentially, he was probably starting to win the race at that point, even though the 10 world's fastest humans are in this race. So, and then it dawned on me. I started watching biomechanics of running animals. And if you watch an animal run, now, you know, how many people here play football and you run through the bags in the first step and raise your feet up? Folks, you're wasting your time. You're wasting energy. You're just not displacing energy in the right form. I had it done myself. So keep your foot low, and you'll actually get more steps in and be able to apply more force. So if you watch running animals, or just animals that run, so you got a lion trying to attack a gazelle, whatever it may be, I actually watch them. They do not pick their feet up in the beginning. They keep their feet very, very close to the ground, and then as they get going to top-end speed, does the leg start to cycle. Okay? So keep that in mind when you're doing a number of these speed drills and so forth. That's only the first 3 or 4 or 5 steps. Then the body transfers and goes into a different phase of running. Okay? But again, I'm only talking about acceleration a day. Next slide, please. Okay, commonly overlooked, this is no kidding, calf strength when developing proper acceleration position. The analogy I use is your athlete running in sand, or are they running on hard wood? What do you want to run your athlete in to get to 40 time? Okay? Now, to strengthen this, and I'll show you what happens in the next slide, to make, let's say, a simple calf raise more sport specific, you need to have a bent knee action. So every time your athlete does a calf raise, they need to bend their knees and then coincide the knee bend or knee extension with the flexion of the calf, okay? That's more sport specific. Now, you don't always have to do it that way. Folks, if you want to go really heavy, that's fine, but then you need to maybe lighten up a little bit and have them do this both at the same time. Next slide. I had this, I don't even know who sent it to me. This was I think this was a bobsled athlete out of Canada. They sent me to look at the film. Now, the film doesn't show everything. I wish I had a little bit better side view. But what happened when this calf struck the ground, this heel was higher. As the athlete applied force with the hip and knee, and this happened to me, the athlete, I made him stronger in the hip, stronger in the knee. That heel, after the foot struck the ground, decreased. It went closer to the ground. I lost force right there and transfer of force. Got it? So if this was my athlete and it happened, this athlete got slower. I addressed the calf strengthening issue for 2 weeks, and then the athlete's 10s and 20 got better. Everything else got better, strength, explosiveness, vertical. But the problem was that the calf, okay, didn't absorb the force. That's the difference between running on hardwood or running on sand when you time your 40. Got it? So you can make your athlete better, but ultimately, you may not get the transfer into sports if there's one weak component in the joint, as you heard Doc say that. And then again, that athlete's heel's still down. So when this foot came down and slammed onto the ground, that heel should not move. And that's where I see a lot of problems in the transfer of a lot of sports and athletes. Because you coaches will do a great job of making their athletes stronger, but then it doesn't transfer. Okay, next slide. So then, for example, folks, I deal with hockey players. I think Jay deals with basketball players. This is the difference in mobility of an athlete. This is no kidding. This is all that this athlete could get. And what happened? You got something? You don't know? Okay. What happened here is this is all the athlete could get, flexion, because their joint angles or their foot is slightly messed up. After some mobility work with a guy named Mike Nelson, it's actually on the end of this, Mike T. Nelson, this athlete can apply force much, much longer and harder, okay? So, I mean, this is the difference of a 3 or 4 inch verticals just by working on different aspects of the athlete's foot, okay? And then also, you'll actually find that, and here's a simple coaching point, I actually found Mike informed me, I had a lot of athletes with this problem, especially hockey athletes that are in boots, the cuboid bone was out. So when you do the lunge, during a dynamic warm-up, everybody does them, right? You actually take your foot and go on the top, and what you'll find is the athlete will probably have a crack in the foot, which can be placing some of these bones back into place, and you'll have a higher function. Now, I would recommend going to a foot specialist to really get this high end, okay? I can't do it. Now, you can do some I won't even say it because I won't, I can't even tell you what I do because I'm not supposed to do it. So it should be somebody that's specialized in foot therapy. But anyway, I'm just giving you an example of there's things out there that you can do, okay? Next slide. Common mistake in coaching acceleration, especially young athletes. Folks, and again, I drew this. Sorry, it's not a great example. But a world-class sprinter, when they come out, they're at this level right here. Why is that? That's because they have enough force to apply that much energy to the ground. I was at the, I think it was the 92, or it had been 96. No, it had been 2000 trials. Yes, it was 2000 Olympic trials. And the ground shakes when those athletes take off. And their angle of their body here. Here's the problem. When you have a young athlete, a coach will try to coach them to lean forward. Look what's happening here. They're bending at the hips. The feet are applying force. The hips are undulating, coming out, which they lose. Okay, which they lose. What don't they have? They don't have enough strength or force to not bend at the hips to lean forward. Just leave them straight up and get them in the weight room so that they run at a better level, okay? This is a common coaching mistakes. Next slide, please. Okay, methods to develop strength and acceleration. Obviously, with the key position, you have to keep the biomechanics of this in mind. Joint angles. You can do car and sled pushes, okay? Hindu squat iso holds. It's all about the knee angles that we showed you prior. Stadium stairs, uphill sprints, squats front and back, wall pushes, it's all the same. But these can be things that you want to do to teach acceleration and build acceleration. Next slide. Methods to develop rate of force. I'm going to give you a few examples of exercises that we use in the weight room that we feel it helps with change of direction and explosion. The hex bar iso deadlift, can you hit that hyperlink advantageous position? There we go. If you want, you can size that up and then skip add. Okay, hit play. So again, this athlete is pulling in an advantageous position because you do, now this would be more for top end speed, but play it again and maybe pause it when he goes up. Does it? Does it blow up there? Okay, so he's basically taking a hex bar deadlift and pulling, obviously keeping good back position, and then pulling up against that. He's getting strong in that particular position, and you actually probably have his heels off the ground a little bit to strengthen the calf. Get out of that, go back to the hyperlink. And then the disadvantageous position in the deep position. Don't hit that. There we go. Same thing. Okay? We'll use that. We'll use it for more actually single legs, but also, folks, I'll use a lot of this maybe in the beginning of my workout to cause particular hormone releases. And they do that with maximum effort. Okay? You can go back to the slide and then move ahead. Okay, you can hold that. Now, here's another isometric. Jimmy's in the crowd. He did this for me about 5 years ago. Maximum isometric. This could be the worst lift that my athletes said they've ever done. 5 or 6 seconds. Well, really, within 2 seconds, your body's pulling itself apart. Your legs feel like, okay? And this is great for transfer of let's say, agility drill. So I had a group of athletes that were very poor at getting down, seemed like they didn't have that, they were just doing the drill wrong. And it wasn't that they were doing the drill wrong, it's that they didn't have the strength to get down there, So we actually didn't coach them up for 3 or 4 weeks, threw this isometric into their program, and they actually all got down there on their own without being coached to get down there. Now, again, this is a single leg deadlift. The reason I do a single leg is because the double leg will cause a lot of spinal pressure. But if you want to click on the exercise, the hyperlink right there, you can see how it sets up. Hit play. You can see you step over the bar, and you really don't need any weights on the bar. And you'll just come up, pull against it. Now, within a second and a half to 2 seconds, the burn is as bad as it can get, and you'll usually do that for 6 seconds. I have never seen an athlete, or I should say, people get stronger. Just click on the web stuff. There you go. Get stronger than within that position right there with that particular exercise, especially if you're very weak in the bottom position. Let's say in a squat and your back's not very strong, or your back's strong enough, but it's your legs. This can help get your legs very strong. It will transfer over to your particular agility drills, okay? So we'll go to the next one. Now, I'll give you a quick example of a sample of basically a progression. You can do the Nordic ham curls, which is a very tough exercise. And these are kind of low velocity stuff. A simple example if you want to hit the hyperlink. I'm sure you've seen them. To do this exercise, it gets pretty tough. And some people say it's bad for you. I don't know. I've had 200-300 athletes do it every year. I don't have many hamstring problems, if any. You can see it's pretty progressive, or it's pretty strong to get an athlete to be able to do that. We'll go back to the slide, click the other one, glute ham fireouts. Now this exercise, the Nordic ham curls, will progress to this. And if your athletes can't do this one, as this athlete would be close, you may put a medicine ball underneath him so he fires out, pulls back, fires out, pulls back, okay? These are examples of making your stuff. Now, again, these are slow. These are slow particular movements, not the fast movements that you would want, all right? Go to the next slide. Okay, how to progress. The progressions are laid out. First exercise will stress eccentric. The second will mainly stress isometric. And the last part of progression puts all aspects together and makes the exercise reactive and more sport specific. Let me show you, okay? We'll go to the next slide. I won't show eccentric squats. I mean, we probably don't need to show all this particular one, but eccentric squats, what happens is, obviously you're going with a 6 count down or an 8 count, whatever you prefer. This is exercise progression. Your back squat, then you want to work on the isometric aspect, which would be a pause back squat, a back squat at the bottom. You can throw in box squats in there, okay? But I prefer, for athletes, the pause back squat. You can do also isometrics in there if you want to play it. Yeah, go ahead. Pause, and then back out. That's obviously more of an Olympic style back squat. And then you can do the isometric with weight releasers too. And then ultimately you can do a sports reactive back squat, which I will get to methods on how to program for that. So this is a more explosive back squat. He's coming down fast. It's very light loads. But again, as Doc said before, and there's some key coaching points which I'll provide in my next talk to how that exercise is done based on some methods of Medvedev. The back squat, keep in mind, folks, the back squat, and I'll talk more about this, a highly detailed program later, can cause an athlete to become slower if it's, or heavy weight. Heavy strength training will teach the nervous system of the human. Let's say my track athletes, we just won the Big Ten. We peaked them with light loads, and you have to understand, to get the most out of these athletes, they are strong already. We spent 6 months getting them strong. Now we're doing high-speed stuff. When you peak them at this point of the year for a Big Ten track championship, if you teach them to strain, that's what the nervous system will spend most of the time doing. So you have to do highly reactive, more explosive movements. And I'll talk about a whole program for that. It will make them slower. Now, if you have an athlete that's not very advanced, maybe coming out of high school that didn't progress or hasn't lifted weights, as long as they keep getting stronger, they're going to be fine. But when you get to the highest level, a straining program or a straining exercise will teach that athlete to be slower and move slower. You will not get the highest results. Next slide. Dumbbell walking lunge with band. This is somewhat of a lunge progression, okay? So you can click on that and get ready to pause it when after it gets playing, okay? Pause. Okay. Reason I like this one. Doing a lunge, I take 2 stretch bands. Everyone knows what I'm talking about, and the reason I use 2 because there's obviously more force that can be placed into there over a longer span. Now, with the pause, what we teach our athletes, once they get in that position, okay, to help them in running and acceleration, the front leg, I'm trying to basically take the ground and squeeze everything together. So they'll come down with the dumbbells, and they'll pause for a second or two, and they're trying to squeeze the ground together. Folks, that helps that action when their legs go together, okay? So this is a step that you can place into your lunge progression. They're trying to squeeze the ground together. His hamstrings on this leg, the front leg, are firing in his glutes. His hip flexors are trying to pull this leg forward. This is an isometric phase. This is a general progression coaching lunge to make your athletes snap when they run, the snap of their legs better, okay? So then we'll go, and then, wait a second. So when he comes up, the reason I like the band, we're pulling the ground behind you. The eccentric lunge that Doc was showing, I think it would be done prior to this. Then this would be your next step for me after I went through maybe Doc's progressions. And going forward, because if this band is applying force, and again, it needs hooked around the hips, you're applying force behind you just like when you run. This makes it more sport specific. And then when he comes up, he should come up on his toes. Okay? Come up on his toes a little. Nope, he's not coming up on his toes at that one. But that's ideally what should be done. Come down, pause, squeeze, go up, drive. You'd come up, drive through. Next, if you get out of there. Then the next one is the lunge jump. Okay? So this one is done without weights. And the reason we went without weights, play it again, please. The reason we go without weights is because obviously we're reducing the load, so then he's applying force at a higher level and a higher action. Now obviously we're doing it for demonstration purposes, but that would be as high, as fast as you would possibly want to jump and as high, okay? Next, we'll go to the next one. Now, how are we going to put some isometric work in there, okay? Or some eccentric work? You can tell he's pulling himself into position, hitting the ground. Do you see how these things have become more progressive and more transfer into speed development from the weight room? So when I do my lunge in the weight room, it started out with the bands and the dumbbells. I dropped the dumbbells. Then I went to this. Okay? Now the next one, we'll add a band to it, which we'll finish it off. So there's a 4-week or a four exercise progression, which can extend over 4 weeks to 8 weeks. Okay? Very good. Now the next one, I threw in there a leg press. If you don't like back squatting or you want to do some other type of a method, or you can see the first thing we'll do is an eccentric, single leg press, and just work eccentrics. We'll go back, 6 count down, and then we'll go to leg press drop. You can see how this will progress into sport specific. Remember what Doc said, the biomechanics need to be that fast, okay? You can see as this athlete drops the weight, he separates it, drops it, catches it in a bent knee position, You can see the separation, drop, catch, okay? Next exercise. Yeah, there you go. So then the next progression would be this. Stop, catch, throw. Notice the separation with a pause. He'll catch it. We'll play it one more time. He'll stop, push, throw. So you're getting the full explosion, range of motion. Now we'll go to the final one. Okay, you can see how reactive it is? Boom. We have a pretty good leg sled. I believe we get that monster leg sled from Elite. Is that what it's called? Does anybody know? That Monster Elite leg sled? It's pretty, it's only about 4 or 5 grand maybe, I think. But we'll go back up, please. So you can see how everything's progressing. Now, we'll do this when we need to get strong, but then we'll start these down here to transfer all this strength over to becoming the better athlete. And you don't have the slide, but if you want to email me, it'll be on the next presentation. You can email me, and I'll get you the slide so then you can go over this. Click on the videos, and you'll be able to see the progressions, okay? But you can see how there's a phase of, as I talked about, eccentric, isometric phase, and concentric phase. The progressions need to take place in this fashion. Next slide. Okay. I've been doing this for a number of years, about 8, maybe 9 years, well, probably 10 now. The accelerated band jumps. Let me give you an example. Let's actually do the split band jumps. Let's take a look at that. So hyperlink on the second one over here. And these are our methods that I came up with. Actually, you can see the athlete here is pausing, or not pausing, but they're using bands. I believe the bands are 9 feet, no, I believe they're 10 feet high. And then the athlete's deloading himself. And the reason we actually did that was I was fortunate enough to have some devices at the University of Minnesota. One was a $200,000 camera system that we started analyzing human movements and realized that those jumping with those bands was the only thing we could do to simulate the speed that was taking place in sports by deloading the body. Now, because let me talk you through this. Step one of a sprint, I can simulate that with some plyos. But as the human body travels faster down with each step, it essentially becomes higher speeds at which the joints contract. I cannot mimic those joint contractions. So this bands and the lighter load training that we use were the only things. Click on band split with a pause. So the progression is do the jumps. Now we'll come down and we'll pause. Okay, and then the next progression would be split jump, make it reactive.
Cal, how does he hold the bands? I can't see it.
I'm sorry, they're under his armpits, okay? 2, yeah, there's one on each side. So he has a band on each side. So, I mean, you can tell, obviously, jumping from this position, how high he's going. We'll run it again. Now, understand, this is high, this is reactive. So let me explain the difference between this one and the other one that you saw. It's to take a little bit. Show him this. Let's go back. Let's run the very top one. You'll see that's the same exercise. But this athlete, at this particular time, he's kind of slowly going down, not being reactive, okay? So his joints are giving when he comes down. Do you see that? You go back to the last one. He lands in that deep position and instantly tries to push and doesn't move when his joints hit the ground. See? See the difference? So it looks like the same exercise, but folks, it's not. It's completely different. This is a whole different world, okay? So that's the difference of the progression. That's the reactiveness that you have to understand to get to the highest level. And now folks, you can see this carry over in agility drills when an athlete needs it. Let's say an athlete goes down in the squat and can't handle the weight and explode up. He needs to work on eccentrics or isometric. He needs more reactive. These are all tied together in a number of ways. But I showed you the key difference. There is a huge difference there than withstanding the force versus absorbing. Up here, he absorbed the force, he landed softly and jumped. Down here with the split one, he hit and violently contracted as fast as he could. Okay? We'll go to the next slide. Now, you can do this. We'll just show the eccentric glute ham. We won't take everybody through all of them. So you come up, you'd go down nice and slow. Actually, it's just a glute ham. One more time. And you would actually put, so the first one would be the exercises. He'd come down maybe on a 6 count and then come back up. Got it? And then the next progression would obviously be he'd come down, pause right there, and then go. Don't worry about it. I don't have the pause there. So then we'll go to the glute ham reactive. Now this time, once they did the eccentric, the next block would be isometric, or the pause, and then you'd come down and go up as fast as you can. Folks, this is a very tough exercise. He's coming down and up as fast as he can. This is the progression. Okay? Now, was there any exercise after this? We actually came up with one, didn't know it would work. This is actually what I'll talk about tomorrow with the whole plan. Okay? Folks, now my throwers don't want to do this when the track girls are in there. Because I said, just don't make a funny face. They won't laugh at you, right? According to how this exercise worked. But ultimately, folks, now here's the deal. And here's the key coaching point with this one. I'll kind of lead into this. But when the athlete's doing that, when he's coming forward, he has to push his feet forward and extend his quads. Why? It's forcing the hamstrings to relax. Then he will pull his hamstrings back. It's very important because some of the most elite humans that the Soviets had found out that it wasn't necessarily the contraction speed of muscles. There's not much difference between a world-class athlete and a novice. It was the relaxation. So then my question was, how do I train that? That's what we'll talk about tomorrow. But this is the same example. One more time. Now, due to joint, okay, at the end of my training cycle, due to the joint specificity, that's for top-end speed versus acceleration. Understand? So this is the difference. The other one, the full range of motion, was for more acceleration. That particular one was top-end speed, okay? So here's the exercise progression. Now, I didn't put the glute ham, because understand, folks, my website that you're seeing these things from, if you put every progression in, I only have 1,400 exercises on there now, you would have 5,000. You can't put every progression in, okay? So I just leave it to you to figure out the progressions. Next slide. I love this lift, glute bars. Anybody ever done the glute bar lift? They know what I'm talking about? I can't even remember. I think it was Brent Contreras, I believe. So you can see basic lift, and you could do an eccentric component to it. It's unbelievable glute development. Now we'll go back to the PowerPoint. And then you can see the glute bar with a pause, so we'd pause at the top, and then we do it very explosively. We do it with bumper plates. This is how you progress your exercises to transfer into